Holmes returned to the study a short while later with Mrs. Hudson following close behind, carrying a silver tray. The housekeeper greeted Mr. Bennet warmly and offered us all a cup of tea and some biscuits, which I gratefully accepted. When she left the room, Holmes asked Bennet to tell me about the mysterious letters he had mentioned earlier. The young man placed his teacup on the small table beside his chair and began his story. I have always been very close to the professor. In fact, I would go so far as to say that he saw me as the son he never had. The professor has always trusted me absolutely and has never kept any secrets from me. Until now, that is. A look of sadness crossed Bennet's face. He paused for a moment, then continued, "One of my duties, as the professor's assistant, is to open and sort his letters. When he returned from Prague, he mentioned that he was expecting some letters from London which would be marked by a cross under the stamp. He told me that I was forbidden from reading these letters and that I should put them aside for him. Of course, I did as I was told. Tell Watson about the box," Holmes instructed. "Ah, yes, the box," said Bennet. The professor brought a little wooden box back from Prague which he kept in his desk drawer. One day, I opened the drawer to search for the letter opener and I picked up the box to move it out of the way. I had no intention of opening it, but the professor saw me move it and he became very angry. He shouted at me and told me never to touch the box again. I was really very upset. The professor had never shouted at me before. Bennet took a small notebook out of his pocket and opened it. "That was on the 2nd of August, he said. Holmes looked surprised. "You've made notes," he said. Bennet nodded. "Yes, I thought that if I kept a record of the professor's behavioral changes it would help us figure out what's happening to him." "That's a very good idea," said Holmes. Bennet returned his attention to his notebook. The 2nd of August is also the date on which Roy first tried to attack the professor. He also tried to attack the professor on the 11th of August and again on the 20th of August. After that, we had to keep the dog tied up in the stables. Roy has always been a very calm and loving animal, Mr. Holmes. I can't imagine why he would suddenly want to attack the professor." "Yes," Holmes murmured, "it's all very strange indeed." Mrs. Hudson had left the tray on Holmes's desk and he poured himself another cup of tea. "So, Mr. Bennet, have there been any other developments?" Bennet sighed deeply. "I'm afraid so," he said. I leaned forward in my chair, eager to hear the rest of this interesting story. 2 nights ago, I was lying in bed, struggling to fall asleep, when I heard a dull, muffled noise in the corridor. I opened my door to see what was going on and what was the date?" asked Holmes. Bennet seemed annoyed at the interruption. "Like I said, Mr. Holmes, it was 2 nights ago, so the date was the 7th of September. Holmes nodded. "Right. Please continue, Mr. Bennet." Bennet took a sip of his tea and cleared his throat. "Before I go on, I should explain that the professor sleeps at the end of the corridor and he has to pass my room to get to the stairs." Holmes nodded. "Anyway," the young man continued, "I opened the door and looked into the dark corridor. The only source of light was the moonlight coming in from the only window.